You would think we'd be the healthiest people in the world, right? But we know that spending doesn't equate to outcomes because the United States basically leads the world in 6 things. We lead the world in infant mortality, maternal mortality, the lowest life expectancy of a civilized nation at birth, the highest number of multiple chronic diseases in the same biome, type 2 diabetes, and morbid obesity.
Wow, we lead the whole world in those?
We lead the world in those 6 categories.
All right, guys, he's back. Gary Brecka, third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm. I love it,
Let's do it, man. You've been up to a lot.
Yeah, been busy, man.
Since you last been on. Started a show.
Yeah, I mean, the message is really resonating. You know, we decided that instead of just building a podcast, we build a real media platform. And so we're starting, language translation into multiple languages. And we added to the podcast by just not having a podcast. So we would do challenges and evergreens and newsletters because the message is really starting to resonate, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah. What are the big messages right now you're trying to get across?
It's that we're not as sick or diseased or as pathological as we think we are. We're nutrient deficient. I mean, if I was to boil the whole message down into a really simple sentence, sometimes I'll when I do stage talks or interviews where I actually have a presentation, I'll throw up this chart. It's called the methylation chart, and basically what it shows is all of this insanely complex biology. Like it's the most confusing chart you've ever seen in your life. And it's the activity that our cells go through every single day, 300 billion times a day, to eliminate waste, to repair, to detoxify, to regenerate. And it's ultra, ultra complex. And what I ask people to do is just look at that chart and tell me if you see any synthetics, any pharmaceuticals, any chemicals. But what you do see all over this chart, I mean, in its infinite level of complexity, are basics, minerals, vitamins, amino acids. And if you actually went into that chart, whether you understand the complexity of it or not, and you just started to say, well, what happens if I just plucked out the B12 or I plucked out the vitamin, the B complexes? What if I just deleted 12 of the 91 essential minerals? How much of this activity would shut down? And you actually get an idea of how complex our cellular biology is and how our cells live in communities. We're not isolated. And what requires optimal cellular health are just the basics, the minerals, the amino acids, the nutrients, the vitamins. And I argue with people all the time that say we can get it all from food. It's very difficult to get it from food because our food supply, our soil basically is so nutrient depleted. And so what's happened is, as you've seen a decline in some of these basic nutrients, folate, vitamin B12, which is actually a metal, like zinc and magnesium, a very necessary metal in the human body, and the minerals, the basic minerals. I mean, most of us are mineral deficient, and we have a hard time accepting that if you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. But this is actually very truthful. Right, and if you look at how the decline in nutrients in our food supply and the increase in all-cause mortality and chronic disease, I mean, the United States is we're the biggest spender on healthcare worldwide. I mean, we spend $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare. So you would think we'd be the healthiest people in the world, right? But we know that spending doesn't equate to outcomes because the United States basically leads the world in 6 things. We lead the world in infant mortality, maternal mortality, the lowest life expectancy of a civilized nation at birth, the highest number of multiple chronic diseases in the same biome, type 2 diabetes, and morbid obesity.
Wow, we lead the whole world in those?
We lead the world in those 6 categories. We lead the world in those 6 categories. And yet we're the biggest spender of healthcare worldwide. And so we know that having a disease management and symptom maintenance based healthcare system. And I'm not of the mindset that there's some evil people at the top trying to kill humanity. Yeah. That's not, I don't think that there's like, a couple of people at the top pulling all of these levers trying to purposely make people sick. What just happened over time was that we built an industry, a profitable industry on the back of chronic disease. I had Kelly Means on my podcast the other day. It was one of my favorite podcasts, and he said something that really just struck me, and it was absolutely true. He said, as a statement of fact, there is nothing more profitable than a sick child. And the earlier that a child gets sick and gets onto the pharmaceutical hamster wheel, the more profitable that is. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody is sitting in Big Pharma and going, how can we make more children sick? But what it means is that the industry is built around maintaining that child's symptoms. Get them on the hamster wheel. We start with Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, and then they're going to move to...
This episode of Digital Social Hour is brought to you by BetterHelp. How do you keep cozy during the holiday season? My favorite way is wrapping up in a blanket and watching Christmas movies with my family and 2 dogs, Milo and Otis. The holidays can be tough on people, and seasonal depression is no joke. Therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that lasts even when the seasons change. It's also a great way to learn more about yourself and understand any big feelings you may experience. You deserve to be the happiest version of yourself, and BetterHelp is here to assist you. BetterHelp's also conveniently all online and ready to work with your schedule. Just complete a brief questionnaire to match you with a licensed therapist today, and enjoy the freedom to switch therapists anytime you'd like in case you don't like the therapist assigned to you for no additional charge. Find peace and comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/DSH today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DSH.
Some kind of mood disorder stabilizing drugs like SSRIs, in their pubescent or post-pubescent years. And then comes the weight gain, the water retention, the hormone imbalance, which is going to lead to, your metformins and other chronic disease maintenance medications. And then by the time we're in our 50s and early 60s, the average American's on 5 pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
Which again is why I always throw that chart up there and I go, when you have a condition like, we label people with all of these conditions: ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, autoimmune disorders. When you have one of these conditions, like if you have ADD or ADHD, you're not deficient in Adderall, right? I mean, if you have high blood pressure, you're not missing a beta blocker. It's not because you don't have an ACE inhibitor in your body. Very likely it's because you have been nutrient deficient over a prolonged period of time, and now you're getting the expression of this condition.
Wow.
Like I spoke at a bone strength conference. It was OsteoStrong a few months ago, and they're doing great things in the world. They're taking people that have osteopenia, which is like the early stages of brittle bone disease, and which progresses to osteoporosis, which is really brittle bone condition, and just applying loads to their bones so their bones can strengthen. But we had this conversation about, what does it take to actually form bone? Because, you look at nursing homes across the country and they are full of elderly men and women that have osteopenia or osteoporosis, brittle bone disease, and they've been taking calcium for 25 years. And it's not calcium, it's the other 12 minerals that we need to make bone, right? We take calcium, phosphorus, we combine these two, it forms something called hydroxyapatite, and you get a really hard bone. But in order for that bone to really ossify, there's 12 other minerals that are required. So if you're not just getting the basic minerals, now all of a sudden you're getting the expression of this condition, brittle bones. If you're missing vitamin D3, for example, the only vitamin that human beings can make on our own, we make vitamin D3, cholecalciferol from sunlight and cholesterol. So if you're deficient in sunlight or cholesterol for that matter, then you have a hard time making this vitamin that acts like a hormone called vitamin D3. And what are the consequences of that? Well, now your immune system's compromised. If you look at one of the second leading causes of morbidity in COVID, it was a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3. So if we would just reframe the way that we think about aging and pathology and disease as could these be prolonged nutrient deficiencies, then the message of hope really starts to resonate. I get a lot of flack because I sell a red light bed and I sell a mat called a PMF mat and this thing called Hypermax. But the truth is, all of this expensive equipment, all it's really doing is mimicking what we're missing from Mother Nature. So I tell people all the time, you want to get it for free? Take your shoes off and touch the surface of the earth, right? Expose your skin to sunlight. Sun's not our enemy. The fact is most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not that we're getting too much sun. If you look at the number of commercial sunscreens, I think there's 23 of them that have been pulled from the market since 2018 for directly causing cancer.
Wow.
And if you actually were to overlay a chart, and maybe I'll send you this chart so you can throw it on the podcast. If you were to overlay a chart of the incidence of the increased use of sunscreen and the rapid rise of skin cancer, you would just see this oxymoronic message that says, well, if we're using sunscreen at 45 times or 50 times the rate that we were in 1980, shouldn't we have less skin cancer?
Yeah.
Well, why is it that we have more skin cancer and we're actually getting less sun and applying more sunscreen? It's because the whole script's been flipped. You know, we think that we need chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals to thrive. We don't. We need minerals, amino acids, nutrients to thrive. Our cellular biology is this incredible community. Just like human beings, we don't exist in isolation, neither do our cells. And when we study them in isolation, when we take a cell out of the body and we put it in a petri dish and we look how it behaves in a petri dish and we apply certain stressors to the cell, and then we assume that when we put that cell back into the human body, it's going to behave the same way. This is where research takes a wrong turn, in my opinion.
Really?
Right? Because we're not looking at ourselves as a whole organism. I mean, everything that we need to thrive is found all around us. I feel like I just went on a massive tangent,
No,
so I apologize.
That was incredible.
I forgot what your question was.
I don't even remember it. We started off with soil, though. I remember that.
Yeah.
Do you think the soil problem is fixable, or is it too far gone?
It is. You know, what's interesting is that I've been talking to several thought leaders in the space about this, you know, and what we would need to do to really fix the broken healthcare system. And the way that you fix the broken healthcare system is first of all, you stop bathing people's cellular biology in a toxic soup, right? You know, we have drugs like Ozempic and semaglutide and tirzepatide, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, but what they're being used for is a replacement for not taking responsibility for the toxic soup that got you to the place where you're morbidly obese or you're a type 2 diabetic. And so now if you take a pharmaceutical and you intervene and you don't clean up this toxic soup, you know, are we really doing what's in the best interest of that person by stripping weight off them? Most of the time, you're actually not just stripping fat, you're stripping lean muscle mass and lean mass in general, including bone density. Or would we be better served to talk to them about what it was that they did that got them there and trying to stop them from doing that? And I think that that's what's so exciting is now we're moving into this era of big data, where you've got artificial intelligence that can take 700 trillion independent variables and create an actionable result. And the combination of artificial intelligence and big data and early detection, in my opinion, in the next 5 years is going to upend modern medicine in a way that is going to be catastrophic.
Whoa.
Because big data doesn't have an agenda, right? I mean, you look at how we built the foundation of modern medicine. It's built on the back of something called the randomized clinical trial. And I'm not attacking the randomized clinical trial science, but you know, randomized clinical trials in the United States, we do more here in the U.S. than any other country in the world. We did about 150,000 of these since 2008. And basically, you come up with a hypothesis. Okay, cholesterol is elevated, so when LDL cholesterol is high, cardiovascular risk is high. So if we push LDL cholesterol down, cardiovascular risk comes down. And so we do this randomized clinical trial. We study a bunch of people in isolation. We come to a conclusion which results in the FDA approving a pharmaceutical or a synthetic or some kind of chemical. And then we launch it in the population. And then we gather 10 more years of data. And we realize that we really screwed up. Right? I mean, if you look at the reduction in all-cause mortality from statin use, it's 0. If you look at the reduction in all-cause mortality for mildly increasing somebody's mobility and exercise, it's 38%.
Wow.
So you mean if I had a drug right now that could reduce your all-cause mortality by 38%, the whole frickin' world would be taking that. But we have it, right? It's just called mobility.
Wow, so statins are 0?
The reduction in all-cause mortality. And by the way, any of these, if you'll make a note, any of these that I refer to on the podcast, I'd like to, if we can.
Link the study.
I'd like to link the study because I get a lot of flack about that. And again, I'm not just attacking big pharma or modern medicine or the healthcare system as being sinister. It's just that the way that we built this enterprise was to manufacture chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals to manage disease. The question is, why do we have so much disease? I mean, most of the people that are listening to your podcast right now, I would argue that they are walking around right now at about 50% of their true state of normal, right? They've just forgotten how good normal feels, right? And they've accepted some amount of either weight gain or some water retention or brain fog as a consequence of aging, or I don't have the same response to exercise. I don't sleep very well. I'm a little bit stressed out. I have aches and pains. I'm in my 50s or my 60s, and my joints ache, and that's just because I'm getting older. None of that is true. If you put the right raw material back into the human body, it thrives in ways that we can't even imagine.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, so exciting.
Yeah, I know a lot of people with that victim mentality, though.
Yeah,
They
the whole society has that victim mentality. If I can get you to subscribe to the fact that you have a disease, especially a genetically inherited disease, which is another thing I take grave issue with, then I can get you to subscribe to a lifetime medication. And again, I'm not saying that medication is not necessary in many cases, but it is not what we should depend on to be optimally healthy. And when you have a society that has developed this notion that, well, my grandmother had high blood pressure, my uncle had high blood pressure, now I have high blood pressure. And even though the doctor can't tell me why I have high blood pressure, it's called idiopathic, I'm just going to accept that I need medication. Well, if you can't tell me what's causing it, then how can you be assured that this medication is what I need?
Right.
Right. If you were able to define it and say, this is specifically caused by this, and this medication will prevent that from happening, that makes sense to me. But when you bring when a doctor sees a patient for any number of what we call genetically inherited disease, which again I take big issue with, because we assume that because things run in families that they are genetically inherited, and that's patently false. When you see that hypothyroid or hypertension or certain forms of cancer or type 2 diabetes or drug and alcohol addiction or depression or any number of other things that do run in families, when we assume that these are genetically inherited conditions without having a gene to point to, we've mapped the entire human genome. So the things that are genetically inherited, we know exactly what they are. The BRCA gene does predispose women to an increased risk of breast cancer. It doesn't mean they're going to get breast cancer. But when we tell somebody that has hypothyroid because their family has hypothyroid that they inherited it without even having a gene to carry that condition, this is a false narrative.
Wow.
And what it does is it makes people think that there's no other way out, right? Because, hey, I'm trapped because of my family history. And the same is true with all kinds of condition.
Yeah.
Right. And we just assume that because it ran in my family that I have it, and now I need to subscribe to this lifetime of medication, when the truth is that we actually rarely pass disease from generation to generation. Really? Our DNA is specifically designed to not pass mutations on that are fatal or flawed. Now, they still get through, but when you look at how DNA replicates and divides, it kind of looks like a ladder that's been twisted if you look at DNA inside of our cells. And this ladder sort of unzips like a zipper.
Yeah.
And then it re-zips again. And what is supposed to happen, and what happens 300 billion times a day in all of our cells, is when these ladders start to line back up, when they don't perfectly align, the cell goes into something called S-phase arrest. There's something that actually stops that DNA from replicating. So we have not evolved to pass disease from generation to generation. We have evolved to pass the inability to refine a certain raw material, which leads to a deficiency, which causes that disease. And there's a significant difference here because, once your genes has been imprinted with a disease, for example, then you're accepting, man, well, I just have this and there's really no way out. Once you take the vantage point, well, I inherited an inability to refine a raw material. For example, for the inability to take folic acid and turn it into the active form the body can use called methylfolate. So I inherited this inability to do this. So I have a deficiency in methylfolate. And this deficiency in methylfolate is leading to all of these conditions: attention deficit disorder, poor focus and recall, poor short-term memory, hyperactivity, all kinds of conditions that we've got great labels for. But at the end of the day, what you inherited wasn't a disease. What you inherited was a nutrient deficiency. And if you knew what raw material was missing from your body and you could put it back in, you would see in many cases those conditions eviscerate. And so a lot of what I've been trying to message about is about just getting people back to the basics.
Yeah.
Sunlight, grounding, breath work, drinking clean water like what you got here. What's this Life Force going
Hydrogen water, yeah.
This is great. I'm a huge believer in hydrogen water. Just go to hydrogenstudies.com and you can go to this website. It's totally free, and you can actually select out the animal studies and just look at human trials. And you can see the reduction in inflammation, the improvement in circulation, the improvement in something called vasomotor activity, which is 70% of our circulatory system. A lot of people don't even realize that 70% of our blood is not even circulated by our heart.
Wow.
None of us has a heart that's strong enough to get blood from our heart to the tip of our toes, through our brain, and all the way through our organ systems, liver, lungs, pancreas, kidneys. None of us. The majority of our circulatory system, 70% roughly, is done by what's called vasomotor activity, which is, it's kind of like a snake swallowing a mouse. And so you imagine like this mouse kind of moving down the snake's body. This is how a bolus of blood is moved through this vascular system. So if you have compromised vasomotor activity because you are nutrient deficient, you think of all of these consequences that come from that, right? Why do most people start wearing readers in their 50s? I'm 54, by the way. These are not readers.
Blue light blockers.
Blue light glasses.
I knew it.
But why do most people start wearing readers in their 50s? It's not because their eyesight's going bad. It's because the vasomotor activity to the back of the eye is compromised.
Wow.
Right? So you start to restore vasomotor, and
so you can restore vision?
No question. I mean, red light is I was on. Hope Joe doesn't mind that I throw this out there, but but I was on Joe Rogan last year, I think in November, and he ended up buying a red light bed, and when he started using the red light bed on a regular basis, and he's always messaging me going, bro, my eyesight is dramatically improving. It's like it's literally getting better and better.
Wow, I need to get one of those.
It's not because it's fixing his eyes; it's because it's fixing the vasomotor supply to the back of the eye.
Interesting.
Right? And so, I don't even know where I was going with that, but
yeah, no, that's a cool little tangent there. But that's exciting that you said that, because I had a friend literally last week. Both his parents have cancer, and he literally told me, "I know I'm going to get it one day because both my parents have it." So you're kind of shifting that mindset.
Absolutely shifting that mindset. I mean, what is all cancer? All cancer is metabolic dysfunction in the cell. A cancer cell was at one time a healthy cell, right? And what happened was there was a metabolic shift in the metabolism of this cell, and it became unhealthy. It became metabolically sick, right? It without getting too detailed, it switches its way of creating energy, right? So instead of using oxygen, it will use carbon dioxide. It will use different forms of pyruvate, lactate, and so now this cell, which was at one time healthy, has now become sick. So now we assume that once it's sick, it can't go back to being healthy again, which I believe to be patently false. And all of the quote-unquote miracle that we have around cancer are not miracle at all. It's just restoring the cellular biology to that cell. And then, what we decide to do is we decide to poison that cell with chemotherapeutic agents. And generally the broad idea around chemo is to take the host as close to death as possible and hope that you kill the cancer before you kill the host.
Wow.
But what if we actually looked at the cellular metabolism? What if we actually looked at what is leading to this explosive rate in cancers? I mean, we have the highest rate of childhood cancer in modern history, in measurable history. Our life expectancy for the first time in 100 years is going backwards. And why is it, with all of these medical advancements and all these chemotherapeutic agents and early detection, why is it that we are still becoming so sick so fast? You're looking at autism rates going from 1 in 3,500 to 1 in 36 children. And so what is causing this skyrocketing rate? It's the continued depletion of nutrients in the human body, so that now our cells do not have the raw materials they need to do their job. And I feel like if we would go back and focus more on what God gave us than what man made us, meaning really study human physiology and study the genesis of a lot of these conditions, the pandemic of chronic disease in this country, we'd find that this is easily fixable. Very easily fixable. I mean, most people are just not living healthier, happier, longer lives because of risk factors they can modify in their life.
Yeah. What do you think's going on with autism stuff? Because miscarriages are also up. So, do you think the women's bodies are just being so impacted by all the toxic stuff? No
question. I mean, we put women on birth control like Tic Tacs now. I mean, so if they're period is inconvenient, or if the the risk of getting pregnant is inconvenient, then they're just going to take birth control, and we use lots of different kinds of birth control, sex hormone binding globulins, all kinds of things to take a woman out of her normal menstrual cycle and essentially delete the portions that are inconvenient. And sometimes it makes perfect sense. I mean, there are lots of young women that are suffering from conditions that need intervention, but when you have prepubescent teens that still haven't fully formed the neuroplastic future of their brains, when you are chemically inhibiting their normal menstrual cycle, their shift from ovulation to follicular to luteal, when you're interrupting the communication between the pituitary and the female organ system, and then we wonder why, emerging from puberty, we're seeing skyrocketing rates of PCOS and endometriosis and polyp formations and uterine wall fibroids and all kinds of conditions that we didn't even see 50 years ago. And so, again, I think that those things have a role, but the first thing I would do if I were on a journey towards optimal health is I would just eliminate processed foods from my diet. And I would eat a whole food diet. I would move more. I wouldn't be afraid of the sun. I'd touch the surface of the earth. I'd learn how to do some breath work. I'd challenge my body, cold water immersion, cold showers, picking up heavy things. Not
Keep it
worrying about
simple.
going outside because it's too hot or it's too cold.
So you're not at the Brian Johnson level.
No, not the Brian Johnson level. And I think there's a place for that too. But again, I'm really trying to message to the masses because I really see the dire strait that we're in. I read a statistic the other day, and I'll have to dig it up. But if I recall it correctly, it was somewhere around 77% of the recruits in the military couldn't pass just a simple physical exam.
Really?
So we're losing fighting soldiers because people don't have the basic level of fitness to even enter our armed forces. And so I think that what we know what we're doing is not working, and maybe a back to the basics approach is exactly what we need.
Yeah.
And I'm still, I'm a biohacker at heart. I'm a scientist at heart. I mean, I love the research. I've been deep down the rabbit hole of methylene blue and red light therapy and ozone treatments and all kinds of sophisticated modalities that I really do think can extend and prolong life. But before we start talking about those things, we got to make sure that the basics are covered.
Absolutely.
Like we said, you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet.
Yeah, 100%. I just got an 8 sleep mattress.
Oh, I got one of those too.
Yeah,
I love 8
one.
sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I track it and post it all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
So my one question about that is the EMF stuff, because you need Bluetooth for it, right?
Well, yes and no. It doesn't Bluetooth to your device, and you can actually put your phone on the nightstand. You can actually turn your phone off, and it will.
It'll still
upload
read
the
it
next morning. But I actually, interestingly enough, I mean, I'm crazy about EMFs too. But I had it EMF tested, and the unit where it plugs in does create some electromagnetic smog, if you want to call it that. But all that goes into your bed are those rubber tubes that are full of water.
Oh, wow.
So there's virtually zero EMF that you're sleeping on.
Nice.
So it actually is probably my favorite sleep device. And I track sleeps on a Whoop, and I track sleep on my 8 sleep. But the nights that I'm on the 8 sleep, I post them all the time. I mean, my scores are consistently between 98 and 100% because it will actually detect not just your respiratory rate, but it will also detect the different stages of sleep, and it will move the temperature to hold you in those stages longer. So
Wow.
REM stage or deep sleep. And these are critical. I mean, if you're not, sleeping is our human superpower. If you're not sleeping, nothing else matters. I mean, it is that critical. I mean, you want to talk about, decreasing all-cause mortality. I mean, poor sleep in this country is another just pandemic.
Yeah.
And if you talk to most people about their sleep routine, they actually don't have one. Right? Like, how do you prepare to go to bed? Well, I just go to bed. What time do you go to bed? Well, when I get on my, like whenever it's the end of the day. Well, when's the end of the day? Sometimes 10, sometimes 1 in the morning. How far before bed do you stop eating? Well, whenever I whenever I'm done eating.
Yeah.
You know, it's we don't protect sleep the way that we really should. You know, we have a routine for our exercise. We have a routine to get the kids to school in the morning. Very few of us have a sleep routine. Very few of us have actually good sleep hygiene. I did a really interesting sleep, I won't call it a sleep study, but I did every month I do these free challenges. So I'll get tens of thousands of people and we'll do like a cold plunge challenge or 10,000 step challenge or a breathwork challenge. And they're always free. And I partnered with Whoop on this one particular challenge, and we sent Whoops out to thousands of people. And we were able to get a baseline on people after 30 days, you know, their sleep. And which I think is very valid data, because they were sleeping in their own environment, in their own bed, next to their own spouse, you know, in their own house. And you get a baseline on them. And then we made really subtle changes to their sleep routine. We just had them start thinking about sleep hygiene, like actually protecting my sleep routine. Like, for example, I schedule all of my meetings and travel around sleep and exercise.
Really?
All of them. My flights are and my meetings are scheduled around sleep and exercise. So sleep is my first priority, exercise is my second priority, then travel, then meetings.
Okay, so no red-eye flights for you.
Never. I mean, I used to do plenty of them building the business, you know. I mean, and that's one of the blessings of success is you can make some of those choices. And there's a lot of people listening to this podcast that are in a position to make those choices, but they still don't.
Right.
But so all we did was we started to measure a couple of really interesting basic metrics. We stopped eating 2 hours before bedtime. We surgically darkened the room. Right, like I had people go around and like really try to remove every shred of light in the room. We dropped the temperature 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Some people used a sleep mask. The people that had a hard time falling asleep, we would use contrast therapy, which is just a really, really hot shower, as hot as you can stand it, for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, followed by a 1 minute ice cold shower, and just to break that catecholamine cycle in the brain. So like it causes like a phase shift, you know. Contrast shift. And then no screen time in bed. And we saw sleep scores pop 28%.
Wow.
Across thousands and thousands of people. And these are like simple things that you could implement, but people just aren't thinking about their sleep routine. Right? There's no, you know, you could have an 8 sleep mattress. I'm a huge fan of that too. But even without the fancy equipment, if you just said, I'm actually going to start to protect my sleep. So I'm not going to eat 2 hours before bedtime. I'm going to sleep in a cold, dark room. I'm going to wear an eye mask, maybe even tape my mouth, which will actually improve the nitric oxide gas and a lot of other gases that actually will help hold you in deep sleep if you don't have any nasal issues. I'm going to do a contrast shower before I get in bed. None of those things will cost you a dime. If you could improve your average sleep score 12 to 20%, game changer. For every facet of your life. Focus, concentration, short-term recall, memory, waking energy, libido. I mean, it's in deep sleep that the majority of our hormone cycling is regulated. It's when the lymphatic system in the brain is detoxifying. You know, not the lymphatic system in the body, but the actual waste elimination pathways in the brain. When the brain is actually getting rid of cellular waste.
Right.
And detoxifying and repairing and regenerating. So if you could just add deep sleep to your arsenal, I mean, that's a human superpower.
That's critical.
Right?
Yeah. Part of the problem with college kids, they just sleep like 4 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah, and even the whole public school system is completely upended. You know, what happens is and I dealt with this with my kids because they're 3 years apart. So I would always have, you know, I had one in high school, one in grade school, one in elementary school, or like one in kindergarten, one in you know, grade school, one in middle school. And the script was totally flipped because the younger they were, the later they went to school. So that by the time they got to high school, it was like the earliest morning. I mean,
6 a.m., right?
All 3 of my kids were zombies leaving the house in the morning, you know. And when I would drive them to school, I'd see the zombie parking lot, you know, at high school. Like, you know,
it's depressing, honestly.
These girls, they got their hair in a bun and they're holding on to a Starbucks coffee and just trying to get into class. And the truth is, you know, as they go through those teenage years, they need significantly more sleep. They're not lazy teenagers. They're sleep-deprived teenagers. And if we actually looked at what would the impact, just the simple impact it would make if we flipped the script and younger kids went to school earlier and older kids, as they got to high school, actually got 2 hours more sleep, this would be a game changer in the entire mental health.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I always wondered why it was so early, man.
Yeah, they get sleep. They get sleep deprived. They get stressed. They get cranky.
In college is almost as bad because you're just stressed and so much homework, and especially med school, man, those kids have it tough.
Oh yeah, they got it tough.
Super tough.
But when we start to think about sleep being our superpower, we actually just start to pay attention to it. If most people listening to this podcast, you really think about the last 2 weeks of your life, you will see that as your schedule got busier or more hectic, the one thing that you pushed around, that you bullied, was your sleep.
So that's like number one for you in terms of priority.
Red-headed stepchild. That was the part of your routine that was always compromised instead of the part of your routine that you vehemently protected.
Yeah, no one was really telling us how important it was growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody. And so hopefully, we want to make real policy change. We would lobby public school systems to, first of all, put physical education back in the schools, but secondly to give these kids the sleep that they need.
Absolutely. Have you dabbled with any Eastern medicine stuff?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Eastern medicine too. Most Eastern medicine is done by observation. The oldest form of medicine in the world is called Ayurvedic medicine. It's Indian, and it's all based on observation. Different categories: Pitta, Kapha, Vata, but it's astounding how much a good Ayurvedic practitioner can diagnose by literally just looking at you, having you stick your tongue out, looking at your ears, looking at the whites of your eyes, looking at your skin tone, looking at the patches of circulation in your skin, and literally narrow in on exactly what is going wrong. I think there's something to be said for medicine that is based on observation, where you really observe a patient or a client and try to decide what's going on internally.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. I know it gets a lot of hate on social media, though.
It does.
Like a ton of hate.
Because it's so funny, Mike. It kept societies healthy for longer than we are than we do right now.
Right.
And like I said, for the first time, in modern medical history, our life expectancy is going backwards. Well, if spending equated to outcomes, we'd be living to 140. Now,
Right.
I truly believe that if you're alive 5 years from today, you will have the choice to easily live to 120, 140
Really?
years old. Oh, easily.
Holy crap. Yeah,
Very
because our
easily.
telomeres are programmed to live to 120, right?
Yes, telomeres are programmed to live to around 120. And we know that there are things that we can do to lengthen our telomeres, one of which is to get our cellular biology out of the toxic soup that it's in. But there are now, we're realizing the powerful implications of things like resveratrol and even peptides, telomerase enhancing peptides that can actually lengthen our telomeres. We mapped the entire human genome. While we can't go in and maybe fix genes, we can supplement for their genetic dysfunction. We can take 700 trillion independent genetic variables and create an actionable result. So it's possible now for people to not just supplement for the sake of supplementing, but to supplement for deficiency
Right.
and the deficiency in their cellular biology. What's amazing is if all we did was test human beings for what their body was deficient in, and the only intervention we did was put the raw material back in their body that they are deficient in and got out of its way, you would see the evisceration of chronic disease. Right? But we believe so much more in what man makes us than what God gave us. And by what God gave us, I mean, the basics that we find, in whole food clean diets and water that's not poisoned and soil that's not poisoned and, all of the toxins that our body doesn't have mechanisms to filter out.
Right.
But if we these deficiencies, sometimes when people see like journeys that I've been on with different clients, and for the record, I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I'm a human biologist, so I have all the respect in the world for the MDs and the practitioners that are properly licensed to practice medicine. I have more than 40 of them that work for me on my clinic side. So I don't engage in the practice of medicine. But what we see repeatedly is when you look at someone's blood work and you see certain blood biomarkers, homocysteine, which is a normal amino acid, which can, in high amounts can cause vasoconstriction, leads to increased cardiovascular risk. Basic inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. When you start looking at people's blood work and you see that they have high homocysteine, they have high C-reactive protein, they have a little bit of insulin resistance, they have high triglycerides, they have elevated blood sugars, their liver enzymes are a little elevated, so the liver's a little inflamed, a little irritated, their filtration rates in their kidneys are a little down, their what's called their EGFR, their glomerular filtration rate. None of this jumps off the page at a physician, right? Until it collapses. And so you can just see the toxic burden that people are under. I mean, we've seen I think we just crossed our 150,000th patient.
Wow.
And
you got a lot of data.
We have a lot of data, and my intention is to publish this data in the next 3 years in a peer-reviewed manner that is going to garner the respect of the scientific community. But what we're going to look at is real data in real human beings, taking blood work and doing a genetic test, and then solving for the genetic deficiencies with supplementation, and then seeing what happens to the blood work, like giving the body a chance to correct itself, right, before we intervene. And I can promise you this is going to rock the foundation of the scientific community, in my opinion, because you're going to see some of the most dramatic shifts in the condition of somebody's biome just by giving their body the raw material it needs to do its job.
So right? Simple. People overthink this stuff.
Yeah, it's they just overthink it, and I think it's it's exciting for me because it's like a message of hope. Look, we're just not as sick or diseased or pathological as we think we are. Very often we're nutrient deficient. And we developed this mentality that a lot of these conditions are happening to us, right? Like if you have an autoimmune disease, for example, if you have Crohn's, just to pick one, then you're supposed to believe that you woke up one day and your immune system is manufacturing antibodies to your colon. Okay, so now your immune system's dysfunctional, right? It's gone haywire and it's attacking your colon for no reason. Or you have Hashimoto's, so you woke up one day and your immune system's attacking your thyroid, or it's attacking the lacrimal gland in your eye, you have Sjogren's, or any number of autoimmune diseases. What if we actually took a step back and said, hey, before I believe that my immune system just went haywire, what if I said, I'm going to take the position that God didn't make a mistake and that the immune system is here for a reason, right? So it's attacking the colon for a reason. I just need to figure out why. Why would my immune system wake up one day and manufacture antibodies to the colon? Well, I mean, the majority of these reasons are that there are pathogens or bacteria or viruses or metals or compounds that are in a location in your colon where they shouldn't be. And so the immune system gets called to that location. And it's going after a pathogen. And in the act of going after this pathogen, it manufactures antibodies to that surrounding tissue, or even very directly, that pathogen is hiding inside of a cell. And in order to get into that pathogen, it manufactures an antibody to that cell, which is a friendly cell in your body. And now all of a sudden you have an autoimmune disease. You assume the immune system's malfunctioning. Instead of assuming the immune system is properly functioning, it's just chasing a pathogen. And you should go figure it out so that through metals testing, viral testing, pathogenic testing, gut biome testing, you should go figure out why the immune system is attacking that pathogen and support it. And what's astounding is then our clinical team will see these antibodies start to calm down. People have Hashimoto's. Very often they have heavy metals embedded in their thyroid. I'm not saying this is the only reason why they have these conditions, but we instantly just assume the body is diseased and pathological and there's no way out, right? So now pharmaceutical, chemical, synthetic, that's our only choice, rather than to go back and investigate why it's acting that way.
What's causing it?
And usually what happens in most people is they have one thing go wrong that causes everything, rather than have this myriad of issues going on. Like I've never met somebody that once in my entire career that had severe anxiety that didn't also have gut issues.
Oh, wow, really?
Yep. I mean,
so anxiety is linked to gut.
Oh, you show me somebody that suffers from very severe anxiety, I will show you somebody that deals with either gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, or cramping on a regular basis.
I mean, I had terrible anxiety in college, and I was constipated the whole time.
There you go.
So that's crazy. I didn't even connect those dots.
I've never, not only have I never met one, I've never even heard of one. And I mean, in the 150,000 patients that have come through our clinic system, when they report anxiety, they report gut issues. And why would, it's interesting how we really look at the brain and the body as being completely separate, almost like they live in different rooms, right? And we don't think that gut issues can cause mental health disorders, but this is absolutely the case. And, we've destroyed our gut biome by, again, just putting our cells in a toxic soup. We've forgotten that we don't actually eat to feed ourselves. We eat to feed our bacteria.
Right.
And our bacteria feed us. And so if our bacteria are disrupted, then the conversion of food into compounds that the body can actually process is disrupted. Again, we're the last to eat. By the time you eat, I don't know, a piece of chicken or a piece of steak, and it goes through the process of being enzymatically broken down by bacteria, and then those amino acids cross into the bloodstream, and then eventually they cross the cell membrane, and they start to be turned into energy, an energy source called ATP. It's not until that ATP is generated that we're actually fed. So we're the last in line.
Wow.
To be fed. And when we look at this sequence of those events, and when it's disruptive, we get this expression of all of these conditions. So again, I think that most of the time we can trace the ailments that mankind is suffering back to specific nutrient deficiencies. And what we're going to do with the studies we're publishing, or we're going to take hard objective data like the 74 biomarkers in the blood. We're going to take hard genetic data, the 5 main genes of methylation, and we're going to supplement for the deficiency that those genes are unable to express. And then we're going to look at the bloods correct themselves in pools of tens of thousands of people, because I'm a much bigger believer in large data than I am of isolated clinical trials, right? Like, just talk about take the Whoop example that I just gave, where and Whoop's doing this all the time. I just did a podcast with their Christian Holmes, who's their on their scientific team, and it's astounding the data that they're getting through these devices, and how you can do large pools of patients and get really actionable data. You take 5 people and put them in a sleep study at University of Miami, and you send them to like this cold room that's 1 click shy of a jail cell, right? With some creepy dude looking at them through through a 2-way mirror, and you put electrodes all over their head, you put electrodes all over their body, and they're like, okay, Sean, sleep. And you're like, it's a freaking plastic mattress, bro. And what about the creepy dude looking at me through the mirror? And then you take 5 people or 8 people and you monitor their sleep, and then you're like, okay, there's a sleep study. We're going to take that and extrapolate it out to the whole population. Well, strap Whoops or Auras on people and measure 100,000 people in their own environment and start to make incremental changes and see how that impacts their sleep. That data to me is more valid.
Absolutely. That's exciting. These companies are going to change the game then.
They're going to change the game.
That's
8
cool.
Sleep, Whoop, Aura, all of these data collection companies, because not only are they able to collect the data, but they're able to collect the data on people in their natural environment. Right.
It's not forced.
It's not forced.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of stuff on microplastics. How concerned are you with microplastics? They just found it in every testicle in, I think, all men, right?
Yes. I mean, microplastics are a real issue. In fact, I'm working with a technology now, which is based on kidney dialysis. It's a blood filtration device. My clinical team, not me. And what it allows you to do is take the blood out of the body and basically run it through a filter, just like a dialysis patient would go through to save their kidneys, or to do the function of what their kidneys can't do. And it runs through this filter, and it filters out the microplastics. It filters out the glyphosates.
Wow.
It also filters out a lot of mold spores, mycotoxins, even viral pathogens. And it allows the immune system to get a leg up from being so constantly busy fighting the debris that's in the blood. And it's really fascinating. I've been digging deep into the studies. Our clinic is really excited about using these on patients, because these are restorative procedures where you just get all of the junk. They're finding microplastics in coagulated arteries as well,
Holy crap.
both atherosclerosis and arterial sclerosis, narrowing and hardening of the arteries. And, so I think the microplastics issue is going to become a significant public health crisis because it's getting worse and worse. And if we don't have ways to get these microplastics out of the blood, first of all, you have to have a way to test for them so that you at least can measure whether or not you're having an effective outcome. But if we could get something like this blood filtration technology to a price point where it was either covered by insurance or available to the masses, we could negate a lot of these environmental toxins that we otherwise are stuck with.
That's exciting. So how long do you have to be hooked up to it, like all day, or?
It takes about 45 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
And it's once.
Just once a year?
Strips it, right out of your blood. And my I can tell you, my clinical team is super excited about it because, one of the sad things is, a lot of these issues that we're facing, people don't feel like they have a choice or something they could do to address it. And that's the worst, is to feel helpless. Like, well, I've got all these microplastics in my body and affecting my cellular biology. What do I do? Well, there's nothing you could do.
For real.
Okay.
I mean, they're finding glyphosate lasts for what, decades?
Yeah. So glyphosate's one of the worst. And it's on the schedule as generally accepted as safe, which gets into the whole other issue about the corruption in our funded research on nutrition, the big food's influence on our research foundations that are funding nutritional studies, and the National Institute of Health, which really should be an independent research institution, in the best interest of the public.
Mm-hmm.
And but when you allow private industry to influence public policy, for its own gain, you end up where we are now.
Yeah, these companies have gotten so big, right? That they just
big.
see it as like a penalty. They pay off the fee or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly Means talks about it all the time. I mean, the biggest mergers on Wall Street in the 90s were tobacco companies buying food companies. So tobacco companies bought food companies. Now you have these massive, food companies, and what are they trying to do? Make cheaper, larger volumes of food. I mean, the outcome is not nutrition-based. The outcome is volume-based. And so this starts a whole era of genetically modified organisms, genetically modified corn and soy and wheat. And when we genetically modify them, we're not genetically modifying them to improve their nutritional value. We're modifying them to improve their yield. And so if the idea of expanding the food supply is purely for yield and profit and not for nutrition, this is you see the consequences of this now. And I actually just did a podcast short where I put several of the studies looking at soil lineage studies, looking at soil studies in the 40s, soil studies in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. And you just see an absolute cataclysmic collapse of soil nutrition.
Wow.
And the quality of the soil. And you can trace just about everything that goes in our mouth back to the soil, right? Whether it's plant or animal based, doesn't matter. It begins with the soil. So when you begin in a nutrient deficient on a nutrient deficient platform foundation, then you have these consequences of severe nutrient deficiencies in the populace.
Yeah.
And what's exciting now is we're able to see these deficiencies and allow people to supplement for deficiency and not just the sake of supplementing. Because that's the other thing. I mean, if you're just Joe Schmo public and you get out there on the internet and you start looking around at what do I take for longevity? What do I take for anti-aging? What do I take for biooptimization? I mean, it is paralysis of analysis.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like NMN, CoQ10, St. John's wort, ashwagandha, CBD gummies, the endocannabinoid system. I mean, pretty soon you're just paralysis of
I was taking
analysis.
40 supplements a day at one point.
Yeah, I mean,
that's too many.
And if you went through those supplements, I bet if I was to really ask you, why were you taking this? What was the outcome you would hope for? What nutrient deficiency is this addressing? You could cut your supplements down by 90% by saying, what deficiency is this supplement addressing? None? Okay, out it goes.
Right.
That's one of the things I like about Brian Johnson, and he gives me some flack sometimes online. He reviews my videos and stuff, but I actually like him. And I think he's showing us what's possible. But what I really like about what he's doing, whether you love him or hate him, is that he's using data. right? He's taken himself out of the picture and said, I'm not going to decide what's good or bad for me. I'm going to let data drive. He talks about how all his supplements have to compete for their life. And I really appreciate that because he's really looking at what deficiencies do I need to supplement with so that my body's running optimally.
Right.
And I think that's a great place to start. Now, being that regimented and disciplined is, practically not ever going to apply to the mass population, but it's still refreshing to see that somebody's actually using data and to decide what they're supplementing with rather than just whatever they're sponsored by or, whatever the hot new topic of the day is, NMN, nicotinamide riboside, what have you.
You got to do your research on supplements too.
You do.
They're finding heavy metals in some of those.
Finding heavy metals in a lot of them. Now look, there are picograms of heavy metals in just about everything. I haven't seen a cacao, for example, that doesn't have some level of metals. Very, very, very extremely low, low levels, picograms. But sensitive enough equipment can detect that. And don't forget that not all metals are bad. I mean, light metals are great for us. I mean, we wouldn't survive without magnesium, zinc, vitamin B12, copper. But the heavy metals the body still can get rid of. It just methylates them very slowly. So I don't think we will ever be able to get our metal load to zero, but we can get our metal load down enough that the body can methylate those and get rid of that waste.
Are you seeing a lot of heavy metals in your patients?
Tons. We actually just started doing heavy metal testing. And again, I think like heavy metal testing, viral testing, these looking at mold spores, mycotoxins, these are great places for people to get the explanation of the unexplainable. So there's so many people that are suffering from different ailments and they go into their doctor and their doctor's like, your blood work's fine, you look fine, right? There's nothing in your blood work that tells me you have any kind of systemic or chronic condition going on.
Yep.
Your headaches are all in your head. Your muscle spasms are all in your head. Your gut dysbiosis is all in your head. Your shortness of breath, your dyspnea, your vertigo, your tinnitus, your blood looks fine. But what very often doesn't show in the blood work are the heavy metal toxicities and the mold spores, the mycotoxins, and some of the viral pathogens. And so we are now implementing heavy metal testing in our clinic for precisely that reason.
Yeah.
Get these toxic outliers out of the way and then see how the body behaves. And normally what you see is a complete correction of their symptoms.
Yeah, the blood work stuff is crazy because they compare you to the general population. So you could appear healthy on blood work, but you could get humbled in other ways.
And blood work is also based on population data. So as the population gets sicker, the averages go down. So it's like, being in a college class that's graded on a curve, right? So if everybody in the class got a C, well, then the highest C is now the A.
Yeah.
Right? So still an average student, but now they're the excellent student. And so when the population gets sicker, you take, the averages get degraded. I mean, if you look at one of the largest hormone studies ever done on Mother Earth was during the Second World War, and we use the same LCMS way of detecting testosterone now as we very similar to what we did then. So they're valid numbers. And you look at all the GIs that were either recruited or enlisted, and they had hormone tests done. So your great-grandfather and my grandfather, our great-grandfather, were walking around with testosterone between 11 and 1,400. Well, if you show up with 11 to 1,400 on a blood test now, your cardiologist is going to tell you, wow, this is a risk for cardiovascular disease, prostate cancer, all kinds of conditions.
Wow.
And the truth is that was the norm. But the population has, our hormonal production has gotten so compromised over the decades that now the new norm is, now we're at a C+.
It's at like 400 the average now, right?
Yeah, even lower than that. I mean,
wow.
I think if you look at the LabCorp average, it's, LabCorp total testosterone is between 260 and 240, 260, and 960. So if you go over 960, you would be considered clinically elevated.
Wow.
Whereas if you were between 11 and 1400 during the Second World War, you'd just be average without hormone therapy.
Crazy.
And so it's really interesting that as we get sicker, the averages the averages go down.
Yeah. Have you looked into VO2 Max tests? I just had Dr. Andy Galpin on last week, and he's saying that is a huge indicator of longevity.
That's one of the, probably, I would say, one of, if not the greatest predictor of longevity, that lean muscle mass, strength, but some of these basic predictors. But the truth is, yes, we are suffocating to death. Remember, we all leave this world the same way. We all die of exactly the same thing. We die of something called hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. Now, it might be a gunshot wound, a heart attack, a stroke, a bus, whatever. But the truth is, the definition of death is lack of oxygen to the brain. And we tend to think of it as an event, but it's not an event. It's actually a slow, predictable curve, right?
Yeah.
So the more poorly you are managing oxygen, the faster you are accelerating towards the grave. The better you're managing oxygen, the longer you're going to live. Not only the longer you're going to live, but the healthier and happier life you're going to live. So we know that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And what happens as we age is, we don't sprint anymore. A lot of us are not respiring, actively, like really using our what's called auxiliary muscles of respiration, our intercostals. And so what happens is our posture changes. We start to collapse in on our lungs. We stop breathing with the lobes of our lungs. We start breathing with our apex. And we slowly start to become more and more hypoxic, and we essentially slowly suffocate. So VO2 max is a measure of your ability to shuttle oxygen around the body. And the more efficient you are at shuttling oxygen around the body, the longer you're going to live. Look at the blue zones. I mean, there was no continuity in diets in blue zones. The only consistency in all of the different types of diets in ultra centenarians was that they were all whole foods, right? Sardinia, one of the highest carbohydrate consumptions, one of the longest life expectancies. You got Singapore, one of the highest meat consumptions in the world, one of the longest life expectancies. The French are screwing it all up because they're drinking wine and smoking cigarettes and eating cheese, and they're living forever. And the Mediterranean diet. So there wasn't continuity in the source of food. So it wasn't a hyper-specific diet like keto, paleo, carnivore, pescatarian, vegetarian. It was that these were whole foods. But what was directly correlated was their level of mobility, right? And their VO2 max. And in Sardinia, for example, their life expectancy was directly correlated to the slope of the hill that they were.
Wow.
So when you got like 90-year-old people like walking up a 37-degree incline to 10 blocks to go to church and then 4 blocks over to the market and then back home, these people are living forever. And why is it? Because they're respiring.
Just from the hills.
Dude, oxygen is... The presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. When oxygen enters the batteries in our cell called the mitochondria, and it gets used as a fuel source, it is 16 times more powerful than the alternate fuel source. So if oxygen enters the cycle, aerobic respiration, you get 36 units of energy. If oxygen doesn't enter the cycle, you get 2 units of energy. So just think of how important your respiring, your respiratory system is to your longevity. And this is why even people that are deconditioned, this is why one of the reasons why saunas have such a positive impact. Saunas will raise the heart rate of even a deconditioned person. I put my parents, who are both elderly, they're both handicapped. My mom has bilateral knee replacements. My father's handicapped from a scuba diving accident years ago. So when I say they're deconditioned, they're not going on a treadmill or an elliptical or out for a 5-mile walk. So minimum 3 days a week, they're in a dry sauna. I bored a hole in a dry sauna. I ran a nasal cannulus for an oxygen concentrator. And for 20 minutes, they do very light weights and their heart rate's raised in a dry sauna and called exercise with oxygen therapy. You can't even imagine or get your arms around the difference in their cognitive function and their mood and their energy and their focus. And I mean, it's incredible. So it's addressing VO2 max.
Yeah, that's exciting though, because Alzheimer's are at pretty high rates now, and old people seem to be forgetful these days.
Yeah, I mean, Alzheimer's, is really something called type 3 diabetes. If you Google type 3 diabetes, you'll see that insulin resistance in the brain is one of the factors that they believe is the genesis of Alzheimer's. It wasn't the neurofibrillary tangles and the amyloid plaques. These are the byproducts of a prolonged inflammatory cycle, right? So when you have neural inflammation and you begin to get these neural fibrillary tangles and you begin to get the production of amyloid plaques, those are the signs that Alzheimer's is there. But really the genesis of it began very often with insulin resistance. And, insulin resistance in the brain is part of the reason why I think type 2 diabetics have a 9-fold increase in their incidence of Alzheimer's. Because, our blood sugar is directly related to the amount of inflammation throughout our bodies.
Wow.
We blamed cholesterol, for example, cardiovascular disease directly on cholesterol for decades.
Don't eat the egg yolks.
Don't eat the egg yolks, right? Right. And what is it? Only 15% of our cholesterol in our blood comes from our diet. 85% of it's made by the liver. But we have this theory that, every time there's a fire, the firemen show up. So if we had less firemen, we'd have less fires. That's kind of the cholesterol myth. Every time you have damage to the endothelial wall of your artery, every time you have damage to your arteries, cholesterol shows up, right? To fix it, to patch it. So if you had less cholesterol, would you have less damage to the arteries? If you had less firemen, would you have less fires? No, they were called to that location because of the inflammation. And cholesterol, in my opinion, also gets a bad rap because it's one of those compounds, it's a construction material in the human body. We use it to make cell walls, cell membranes, to make nearly every hormone in the human body. But it also gets called to the site of damage. It didn't light the fire, right? The firemen didn't light it and then show up and put it out. It got called because there was a fire. So cholesterol gets called to the site of damage and inflammation, which is very often the consequence of high blood sugar. I mean, high blood sugar is the root of all evil. That's what the Bible should say. Blood sugar is the root of all evil. not the love of money.
I got
just kidding, guys.
I got a fun one we could wrap up here with. I was talking to Madison, your daughter.
Right there.
So I don't think you've ever been asked this, but did you used to own a nightclub?
That is such a random question. Madison, were you dishing?
Talking about growing up.
Growing up, yeah. I did. I owned a nightclub in Miami Beach called Mint. Proud to say it's one of the longest running nightclubs in Miami-Dade County.
Wow.
But all of the byproducts of owning a nightclub are terrible because it catered to every vice that a man could have. So that ended in divorce and bankruptcy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But still a really, really interesting time. And I was still always working in the life insurance space. And I think that I was just so inauthentic and so bored at that point in my life. I was always looking for that stimulus, and I thought maybe buying a nightclub, would be the right thing to do. Financially, that worked out well, sort of ethically and morally. It was the worst decision I ever made.
You've done a total 180.
Yeah, total 180. Yeah. That was 2000. That was 2005 to 2008.
Wow. So you were a partier back in the day. Let's go. Gary, it's been cool. Where can people find the podcast and what you're up to, man?
Amazing. TheUltimateHuman.com. They can just look up for The Ultimate Human everywhere that they watch their podcast, and they can go to TheUltimateHuman.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I have a free newsletter I write every week, just trying to get this information out. And I'm not stupid enough to think I can do it on my own, but I'm smart enough to know that I can build an army of people to get the message out.
Absolutely. We'll link below. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome,
Gary.
brother. Great jamming with you, brother.
Thanks for talking.
Great jamming.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.
It's just science.